Hello, your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley here again, back for another episode of the History of Comics podcast, this time with the third and final part of the history of American female cartoonists. When we last left off, we had leaped from comic strips to comic books, and now we're about to dive into the life of one of the most important American female cartoonists. Marie Severin was born on August 21st, 1929. Growing up in an artistic household, her father worked as a fashion designer. She would take a few drawing lessons in her teens and even attended the Pratt Institute for one day before deciding to just go straight to work and make money. Marie would go to work for EC Comics with her brother John, who got work for her in 1953. Severin started out as a colorist in what she described as DC's His Girl Friday, along with doing other odd jobs. She had originally applied to Disney in New York City, but was told that they didn't hire women, which shocked her after the more progressive treatment she got at EC. Reportedly, she was led into a room filled with white men drawing as proof, and Severin didn't want to work there anyway after he saw the place. She later went to Marvel in 1955 after EC folded from The Seduction of Innocence being published, only to be cut from the company after a year and a half. Severin would freelance as commercial artist until 1964 when Lee rehired her. In 1966, Marvel had become so popular with comics like Doctor Strange and Spider-Man that Esquire magazine approached the company about a feature. However, none of the artists at Marvel felt in enough for Esquire, so the job went to Severin. Reportedly, Marvel's founder was so impressed with her work in Esquire, he encouraged her to become a regular artist at Marvel. According to Severin, Martin Goodman commented, "Why do you have her in production? You have a drawer." Which led to Stan Lee to ask Severin, "Would you like to draw? I need you. Steve Ditko just left." Severin would replace Bill Everett, who had succeeded Ditko on Doctor Strange, a daunting task considering it was one of the Master's great artistic series, and would also do King Cole, The Submariner, and The Cat, all while inking and coloring other books as well. Later, Severin would work on Marvel comic book adaptations of The Muppet Babies and Fraggle Rock, while also doing the parody series like Crazy and Not Brand Eck. In 1976, she co-created Spider-Woman with Archie Goodwin, designing her original costume in the Marvel Spotlight issue number 32 in February of 1977. Severin would continue to work freelance up into the 2000s when she retired, and even still produced the occasional piece, including to help recolor the EC retrospective books by B. Craigston Comics, which won both the Harvey and Eisner Awards in 2003. These were some of the numerous awards Severin would win throughout her career. Notably, she was inducted to the Walt Eisner Hall of Fame in 2001. She passed away on August 29, 2018 at the age of 89. Of black cartoonists, only 3 had managed to break the color barrier of the white-owned comic books in the first half of the century, and all were men. However, that doesn't mean that black female cartoonists weren't producing, such as Jackie Ormes, who was born on August 1st, 1911 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She would write and draw throughout high school and was an art director of a yearbook, the Monongahela High School Yearbook, in 1929 and 1930. It was here the first examples of her cartooning work were seen with caricatures of her fellow students and teachers. During this time, Ormes wrote to the editor of the Pittsburgh Courier, a then black newspaper published on Sundays, Robert Vaughn. This correspondence led to her first job covering a boxing match, which made Ormes a lifelong fan of the sport. Soon she was working for the Courier as a proofreader, editor, and freelance writer, producing articles on everything from police beats and human interest stories. While Ormes stated to love running around town and writing about everything she saw, what she really wanted to do was draw. Thus, Jackie Ormes submitted Torchy Brown and Dixie to Harlem to the Courier, first appearing on May 1st of 1937. The strip became so popular it was later syndicated to 14 other black-owned newspapers, and as a result, Jackie Ormes became the first black female cartoonist to be nationally syndicated. The story began with the title character, Torchy Brown, leaving her farm in Mississippi to find work at the New York City's famous Cotton Club, encountering romance and danger along the way. The strip ran from April 30th of 1938, likely when Ormes' contract ended at the Courier, and when she would later move to Chicago in 1942, where she wrote for the Chicago Defender, at the time one of America's biggest black newspapers. In 1945, she did single-panel strips like Candy, about a black maid, which ran from March 24th to July of 21st of 1945. By August of 1945, Ormes had returned to the Pittsburgh Courier, where she did Patty Joe and Ginger, a comic about 2 sisters that took on a social and political commentary, and it would run for 11 years from September 1st, 1945 to September 22nd of 1956. and of whom Patty Jo was manufactured into a doll in 1947 by the Terry Lee Doll Company, becoming the first black American doll with an extensive wardrobe. Despite being popular across all races, Terry Lee didn't renew Orme's contract in 1949, and now the dolls are considered prized collector items. As for Torchy Brown, Jackie Ormes had to put the character on hiatus for 10 years. In 1950, Ormes returned to the character with Torchy and the Heartbeats, appearing in the pages of the Pittsburgh Courier, which added a new 8-page comic insert on August 19, 1950. This time, Torchy was adventuring in the jungles of Brazil in the middle of hurricanes, and would be attached with Torchy's togs, which covered clothes for paper dolls. Unique in the strip was that Torchy also addressed issues of racism, sexism, and even ecological issues, particularly in the strip in which Torchy and her doctor boyfriend confronted the topics on September 18, 1954. Ormes would eventually retire from cartooning in 1956, but would continue to produce murals and still lifes until her death on December 26, 1985. Posthumously, Jackie Ormes was inducted into the National Association of Black Journalists Hall of Fame in 2014, and then the Will Eisner Hall of Fame in 2018. Another black female cartoonist was also Dolores McClary, who did Firewall Freddy for Help, a black humor magazine in the 1950s. Of course, not all the heroines in comics were reporters, detectives, or adventurers, such as Tessie the typist and Nellie the nurse, which had the title characters in more traditional female jobs. In the late 1940s, Dorothy Bond syndicated Chlorine, a strip about secretaries. Edna Kala did Sally, which ran in the trade publication Fabrics with the intention of advertising the products. Margie Henderson's Little Lulu sold Kleenex in the Sunday section, of course, of the national newspapers. Amelia O'Dowd Jones did the Sunday Sun, which appeared in the New York City subway system from 1935 to 1966. They were originally drawn by Fred Cooper, designed to stress good subway manners, before his assistant O'Dowd Jones took over, signing her work Opie. Jones was also created Ready Kilowatt and is credited with introducing the term litterbug from her Sunday Sun strip on 1946. Nobody loves a litterbug, turning the then common term jitterbug on its ear. Ironically, as with many female cartoons who use a gender-neutral name, Opie would be called out in newspapers for the Sunday strip's depiction of women jabbing strangers with umbrellas or clunking their heads with handbags. Ramona Fradon was born on October 1st, 1926, growing up in the outskirts of New York City. She began her art career after graduating from the Parsons School of Design and marrying her husband, New Yorker cartoonist Dana Fradon, who encouraged her to try cartooning herself. Her husband's friend, letterer George Ward, had Ramona provide some samples to present to studios, which ultimately led to her to land a job at DC Comics with A Shiny Night story. Soon, she did Aquaman for DC and Adventure Comics, continuing for 10 years, during which time she co-created the character Aqualad with writer Robert Bernstein in the Adventure Comics numbers 269 on February of 1960. After her time in Aquaman, she would co-create the character Metamorpho with writer Bob Haney in The Brave and the Bold number 57 on January 1965. 2 issues later, in issue number 59 in April-May of 1965, Fradon drew the Batman-Green Lantern team-up, which was the first time in the series that Batman teamed up with another superhero, later to become the series' hallmark. However, Fradon would take a 7-year absence in 1965 to raise her daughter, before returning to DC in 1972 to work on Superman, Batman, and Plastic Man. She would later work on the strip Brenda Starr in 1980 from Dale Nisnick when she retired, continuing the series to her own retirement in 1955. Fradon would later admit that she never was interested in superheroes, despite her brilliant work on them. Despite being retired, Fradon, like many artists, still finds time to work now and again, such as contributing to the SpongeBob comics in 1999. In 2006, Ramona Fradon was elected to the Will Eisner Hall of Fame. After the public of Frederick Warburton's seduction of the innocent in 1954, the industry imposed the Comics Code Authority to regulate its content to prevent the government from doing so. However, this self-censorship led to the contraction of the industry, and the first artists who were fired were women, with many female-oriented books, particularly the romance genre, being phased out. Like many artists during this time, women would find a new venue in underground comics. Lee Mars was born on September 5, 1945, and would graduate from the American University with a degree in fine arts. While at school, she was introduced to comic strip artist Tex Blaxdell through his daughter, and would soon be working on Little Orphan Annie, Prince Valiant, and High and Lois as his assistant. Mars later formed the Alternative Feature Services, AFS, with the intention of providing feature stories to college and underground newspapers. She would later work with Trina Robbins, who introduced her to the underground comics genre, along with Shelley Sampson, Bully, and Suzanne Laxer, Sousa, meeting in San Francisco in 1969. The company would last for 6 years, while Mars would be the regular contributor to numerous underground comics, notably women's comics, since it was founding in 1972, with stories addressing homosexuality and women's rights. Mars would also contribute such stories to Heavy Metal and Epic Illustrated. In 1973, Mars produced the first of three-part story, The Further Fattening of the Adventures of Pudge, Girl Blimp, a story about an overweight 17-year-old girl who hitchhikes to San Francisco to lose her virginity. It would take till 1977 for the last part to be released, and Mars would later collect the whole series in Pudge, Girl Blimp in 2016, which would lead to an Eisner Award nomination. Despite her career in comics, Lee Mars also found work at both Marvel and DC, mostly as a writer, contributing stories to Wonder Woman, House of Secrets, and Crazy. Lee Mars also runs the Lee Mars Artwork, a digital design and animation company that has provided work for Disney, ABC, Time Warner, and MTV, among others, and previously won an Emmy for her animation work on the documentary covering the 1968 Baltimore riots, while also winning the Inkpot Award in 1982. All this while still being a feminist alternative voice in American comic books. It Ain't Me, Babe would be California's first underground feminist newspaper in 1970, which soon produced It Ain't Me, Babe Comics, the first all-women comic book produced by Trina Robbins and Barbara Willie Mendez under Last Gasp. While only one issue, the 36-page comic would eventually sell 40,000 copies after 3 printings, inspiring further magazines. Soon, it would include Julie Wood, who signed Julie's Ghoulies in the comic All Girl Thrills in 1970. Another comic was Tits and Clits, which was by Joyce Farmer and Lynn Chen Lively, with Nanny Goat Productions, which chose to be more vulgar than high class, running from July of 1972 to November of 1987 for 7 issues. It would beat Women's Comics by 2 months, and which would lead to Women's Comics 1972, formed by Trina Robbins. The annual magazine would run for 17 issues until 1992, featuring many of its creators from It Ain't Me, Babe. In 1974, Roberta Gregory would be the first published lesbian cartoonist in women's comics, though Willie Mendez would quit the magazine in 1972. In 1992, Women's Comics officially removed men from its title with issue number 17, but also be the end of the comics, as many female-centric comics had become more widely available, having one of the originals fall to the competition. Choices in Stripes, AUSA, was made for charities, and was also noted for being the first pro-choice comic, while later a benefit for the Shanty Project. Holly K. Turtle and Mimi Palm published comics in 17 magazine. Palm in particular had a successful career in Hollywood, working as a writer on TV, notably on The Simpsons, with his first full-length episode, Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, which ended up being nominated for 2 Emmys. However, she wasn't made a member of the regular writing team when the show was picked up by Fox, allegedly because the showrunner didn't want a female writer on the staff. Palm would later write 2 graphic novels, Over Easy and The Customer Is Always Right, which mainly dealt with her life as a waitress. Both volumes were highly acclaimed. Wendy Penny and her husband Richard ran Warp Graphics, which published their comic ElfQuest, a fantasy series that first appeared in 1978, focusing on a community of elves struggling to survive in a fantasy world with 2 moons. They were also the first publishers of Colleen Doran's A Distant Soil, which Doran's created at age 12, which went on to be published by Area Press, while Doran also went on to draw for Marvel and DC. Doran began her comic book career quite early, winning a contest at the Walt Disney Company at age 5. She later attended the Christopher Newport University and the Art Institute of Pittsburgh before breaking in the comic scene as a teenager when Tom Long, the owner of the fanzine Graphic Showcase, recruited her to draw his revival of Miss Fury. However, Doran quit the assignment over his adult content. She later contributed to other fanzines such as Land's Lantern and A Distant Soil, about a young woman who is the heir to an alien religious dynasty, would be published through those as well as through Warp when they picked it up for 9 issues. However, Doran would leave Warp over a contract dispute, which is why the art for those issues had never been republished, and also leading her to redraw the entire series to be publishing under under the Donning Company before Doran self-published The Distant Soil herself. It has since been published by Image Comics in 1996 and has sold 700,000 copies through multiple printings. Doran has also found work with Marvel and DC, providing art and covers for such works as The Sandman and The Shield. Colleen Doran continues to be a successful writer-artist today and is considered by many one of the top female creators in her field. In 1985,